Our channel is Red and April Off Grid. Thanks for joining us as we share our DIY home build. In today's video, Red will be finishing and installing the oak window sills and building and installing custom door frames.
Picking up where we left off last time, I'm moving to the finishing step of these oak window sills that I built in the last episode. These are made from oak that I salvaged from an incredibly overbuilt set of bunk beds that we bought at a thrift store. I really love the finishing process. It's a really fun part of carpentry. Actually being able to apply the finish to the wood may be the best part of the entire experience. Putting on this tung oil, so I'm using tung oil finish here. Putting on this tung oil, you can really see the color and character of the wood start to come to life. This initial shine that you get is just really something remarkable. I'm leaving the natural finish. I haven't put on any kind of a stain. I just sanded these down with up to 220 grit to get them nice and smooth. Filled in some of the cracks with a dark filler that I thought would blend in nicely and not stand out too much. I find that actually dark fillers are less noticeable than light fillers most of the time, oddly enough. Once that was all done, I'm just applying this tung oil to these, and man, it's really bringing out the character in these boards. We actually selected parts of the board to show that have a high degree of character that we find very appealing. This oak is really interesting, and oak naturally has a lot of variation in pattern and character that is really interesting, and I think that's one of its properties that originally made it so popular. Unfortunately, over the years, the oak that's been selected for most of the cabinetry and furniture we see is very bland oak. It's very uninteresting because usually in cabinetry you want to see a really uniform character and texture in the wood grain. But oak really has an amazing amount of variation in what it produces as far as grain and character and patterns. So I'm actually able to highlight that here by selecting the interesting and character grain that I want to show. And so it's been really fun to do, and you can see the amazing properties that oak can have if you select more interesting pieces. And so it's really been fun to do here. So here I've just applied a good soaking coat of tung oil to both sides, let it sit for a little while, and I'm coming back to wipe off the excess. Here I'm starting to unload the lumber for the door frames. So I'm finally getting around to working on the doors and the frames, and this is an exciting part of the project that I personally have been looking forward to. A lot of carpentry involved, the kind of stuff I really enjoy. We've got a huge load of lumber that we spend a lot of time picking out at the store, trying to find the really good stuff that'll clean up well, and I'm just starting to process it. We decided to use antique and vintage doors all through the house, and of course each one of those is unique in size and character, and so I'm building custom door frames for every door. I've carefully measured all of the rough openings and the door that will be fitting into that rough opening and done the calculations to determine the thicknesses that I need to make these boards for the door frame. They're going to be rather unique door frames, and the trimming around the door frames is going to be unique and unusual, and I think kind of attractive, so we're going to give it a try and see how it turns out. It's definitely a little bit unusual, but we think it'll go really well with our home design and other decorative elements. So I compiled a list of all the boards that I need for all the frames, and I'm starting to process it all at once. And so I went through the planing process here, and this creates a ton of sawdust. I mean, just an incredible amount. It's been a lot of planing to take all of these boards to thickness. Here I'm shoveling up some of that sawdust, and April will be using it for mulch around some of the trees. The next step was to take these boards to width and square up the edges, and to do that I used my table saw and my jointer. Here I'm using my jointer to clean up an edge of a board that I've already taken through the table saw to get it close. These large boards are really hard to do in my little jointer. It's really too small for this, and it's kind of difficult to manage, but I'm able to make it work. It's a little challenging, it's hard on the shoulders, holding the board up as you're putting it through, but it's doable. I'm using my table saw to take the boards within about 1/4 of an inch and then finishing it up to size on my jointer. We did consider using a hardwood for the door frames, but in the end we decided that pine would look better and go with the home better. We have some finishing ideas for the pine that we think will look interesting and really go with the home. Here I'm working on some small pieces of pine that I've ripped out of 2x4s that I'll be using for baseboard and for door stops in the door frames. I started by just ripping these out of 2x4s, and then I put these through the planer to get them to width, and now I'm going through the joiner to get the edges all squared up and get them to the right thickness. I did have to do a lot of these. It's amazing how much, trim and how many different pieces of wood you need for door frames. It amounts to quite a pile of lumber that I'm processing here, but it really works well to do everything all together, to make kind of a run of lumber and go through all the processing steps at the same time. The next step in the processing was to work on these headers for the door frame. So this is the part of the door frame that's on top, and I'm going to cut a little notch on either side of the header that the side pieces of the door frame will fit up into. And this will be a visible connection. It locks those side pieces into place, and just as a cool little piece of joinery, little show. I'm just using my table saw set to the correct depth and width to create this notch. I start by going full depth and then make several passes at a gradually decreasing depth, and then just kind of go over it back and forth and just use that blade to kind of route out the wood out of that area. It's fast and easy to do and doesn't require a special router bit. I followed that same step for all of the headers and got all those done, and now I'm moving on to some sanding. I just do a nice rough sanding to get all the mill marks out and get it generally smooth, and then I'll go back in and do some wood filling. The main thing that needs filler on these boards is the knots. With pine, you're always dealing with knots, kind of the main problem. Some of the knots actually fall out, the small ones, and some of them just need to be stabilized, larger knots, and just needs a little bit of filler in there to stabilize it. And so that's what I'm doing here, just working on those. We generally don't mind the look of the knots. It gives the board some character. We just tried to find boards that don't have too many big knots and that were nice and straight and clean. Which was a bit of a challenge. We definitely spent some serious time at the lumber store to find boards that would work for this project. Here's a quick look at today's harvest from the garden. We have a lot of winter squash that are coming off, and actually we have a bunch of those in storage, both butternut and spaghetti squash. We'll be eating on those for months. The filler is dried, and so now I'm sanding those spots down. Once that's done, I move on to a finer grit sandpaper to do the finishing sanding on these, and I'm just using a 220 grit to put the finish sand on. Once the boards are all sanded down to the finishing grit, I use the sander to put a chamfer on the edges that need a chamfer. You could do this with a router, but I've found that I have better success just doing it with my sander and using the sandpaper to put the chamfer on. Especially with pine, I find that a router has a tendency to splinter and chip out the edges. To finish these boards, we first applied a wood aging accelerator, which turns them a kind of a light pale gray. And so you can see these boards here that I originally laid out are that pale gray color. And so that's the effect that the aging accelerator has on them. And it's a chemical that reacts with the tannins in the wood to actually accelerate the aging process. So what you get is these boards that have basically been aged, and it adds a lot of interesting color and appearance to the wood. Different pieces of wood look different. You can see some are grayer than others, and I think that has to do with the amount of sap that's in the pine kind of integrated in the wood, allows more or less of the chemical to react with the tannins. And so anyway, you get this variation of colors, which we find very appealing. It's very interesting. So after we applied that, I'm just applying tung oil to everything, a good soaking coat of tung oil. So I let that set for a while. I'm wiping off the excess and then just taking them into the shop to let them dry and then bringing out another batch. These are some of the bigger boards that are actually make up the door frame, and we've treated them the same way with that aging accelerator and then finishing them with tung oil as well. For the tung oil treatment, I'm giving it a good initial soaking on both sides where I apply it over and over again until it basically stops absorbing, and then let it set for a while, wipe off the excess. I'll do another coat the following day, and then let that dry for a good while, and these should be ready to install. Here you can see the pile of wood that I'm accumulating for this project. Fortunately, I have a good place to store it. I can just store it in my shipping container shop. It has nice high ceilings, and so it's a good, dry, secure place to keep these stored until they're ready to install. While I was working on the door frames, the window sills have been drying and they're finally ready to install. Really looking forward to this. I attempted to cut all these to size, but I didn't have an opportunity to check the fit, to do a test fit, because at the time the floor was drying and I didn't want to walk on it. And so some of these didn't fit exactly right, and I had to do a little trimming. So in fact, a good part of them I had to do a little trimming. So on each of these, I had to go through the process of seeing if it fit, and if it didn't, going outside and just using my hand circular saw to take a little bit off. These floors are still in the drying process, and so I'm walking around in my socks. We're trying not to damage the floor, to track in a bunch of sawdust, and so that's why I'm out here in my socks trying to clean them off and not track in too much dust and stuff, and walking on plastic, trying to give this floor more time to dry. Once I get it trimmed down and fitting properly, it's a simple process to apply some construction adhesive and press it into place. For these lower sills, that construction adhesive is all that's required to hold it in place. Really liking the looks of these. It's a nice wide sill, the wood is really pretty, and it comes out over that corrugated metal by about a ½ inch in the front and then about 1 inch on the sides. In the living room, we installed this corrugated metal as a wall accent above and below the windows to create that height and just to give it some interest there. And so in order to cover up and trim out that corrugated metal, I needed to do window sills on the top and bottom of the window. For these upper window sills, I was able to select some pieces that had a lot of character, some large cracks that had to be filled in. Because of those cracks, I didn't really want them on the lower window sill where you might be setting things and getting a lot of wear and use. But on these upper window sills, it doesn't get any wear, and so they're attractive, and I wanted them to be on display up there, so that worked out well. On these upper window sills, I didn't want to trust an adhesive only, and so I decided to go ahead and use a couple of screws, just one in each side, to hold it securely in place. I'm just using a nice cabinet screw. They have a tone that goes well. Just getting ready to move on to the last window in the living room. This is a smaller window, and having to do quite a few test fits on these. Naturally, they don't fit. I wanted a really nice tight fit in all these windows, as tight as possible. And so, my initial cuts were on the generous side, and so most of them need just a little bit of trimming. So I have to go outside and take a fine cut off the edge in order to make these fit. But I really wanted a nice tight fit, and that's working out. Just requires a little bit of extra work. Well, this is really cool how this is working out. You just never know, how an idea that you have envisioned will actually turn out in real life. And this is looking really good. We're really pleased how these accent walls or how these accent portions of the wall are coming together. This corrugated metal looks really cool on the walls, and these wood, this heavy, nice, lovely oak wood is really setting those off and finishing off these windows really nicely. The top and bottom wood and the top and bottom metal has a really nice effect. Now moving on to the master bedroom and this really big windowsill, I'm just trimming away a little bit of the foam that was around the window frame and getting this sill all nice and flat so that I can put this in. And now doing a little test fit, had to do a little trimming and just getting ready to install. This is looking really nice. We chose a real character piece for this windowsill, and I love the way it looks. The next day I moved on to the guest bedroom, and I'm doing another one of those big windows. This window I needed to trim down the drywall. The drywall was just a little high, and so I needed to trim that down to the level of the rough end opening. And now I'm sliding that in place, doing that test fit. As you can see, this window doesn't close quite all the way. This window has always had a problem, and it's a problem in the side mechanism of the window. And so I'm going to be doing a special midweek video coming up very soon to show how to take these windows apart and fix those types of mechanical problems in these windows. Now I'm ready to put on the bottom trim piece. So it's just a piece that goes underneath the sill that is 45 on both sides. It's also that same oak from the bunk bed that I've milled down to the correct size and finished. And so I'm just putting that up in place and using some 2-inch brad nails to secure it. These pieces also have a lot of character in the wood itself and really finish off these window sills. Of course, in all the bedrooms, I'm just doing a sill on the bottom of the window and then putting this trim piece up underneath. On this one, I used a little bit of glue to attach it as well, some glue, and then just put in some brad nails. This is the smaller window in the guest bedroom that I'm working on here. We also have 2 smaller windows in the master bedroom, so I'll be going back to that side of the house to put on this final trim piece next. An air compressor and a brad nailer is such a useful tool for so many parts of the construction, especially when it comes to trimming everything out. So it's really nice to have. Here I am putting that trim piece on underneath the sill in the master bedroom and then moving on to some of the smaller windows. This really finishes it off, and man, we're just loving this look. That oak looks so nice. On the windows that open up, I needed to add a little depression in the windowsill so that you could get your hands in there under the lip and open up the window properly. And you can see an example of that in this windowsill here. I think they turned out really nice. It kind of adds to the look of the window, and they work really well. And now just moving on to the last window. This is the window in the master bathroom that I'm installing now, just putting in that last piece of trim. And you can see on my right that insulation there, so that is the master bath stall. So that's an upcoming project that we'll be working on, and that's why that's unfinished. While we were working on trim, I decided to finish up the trim around this accent wall door. So this is the door to the closet in the guest bedroom. And we had finished this accent wall and put the metal up, but just needed a little piece of trim to cover up the side of the metal. So while I was doing all my trim earlier, I created some thin pieces of wood that we painted white that I'm now brad nailing into place to finish this out. Well, I'm finally ready to move on to the installation of the door frames. After going over the rough opening and making sure nothing was sticking out or protruding, I'm ready to attach the pieces of wood that I milled directly to the rough opening. Now, this is different than the way the door would normally be installed on the interior of a home. Your typical interior door is going to be a pre-hung door, which means you have a door that comes with a frame already around it, and you put that frame inside the opening and then shim it to get it straight, and then screw it in to affix it, and then put trim to cover up those gaps. But since I'm making these door frames custom, I'm able to make them to any thickness I want. So I did all my measurements, made them to the right thickness, and there's no gaps or shimming required. I'm able to attach the frame boards that I made directly to the boards of the rough opening. This door frame went in really quick. I put in the header first, and then these two side boards just lock into those little notches that I made. And now I'm attaching those to the rough opening, and this is almost finished. Next, I went back to my shop to get some of those trim pieces. I want to go ahead and install the trim around this door while I'm at it. And I'm just doing some measurement here and getting ready to cut these trim pieces to size. I'll be bringing up my miter saw to use to cut them to length. I like wide door frames, so I did something a little bit different here. I extended the actual door frame out past the walls by an inch or so, and this trim will actually go on the outside of the door frame and butt up against it. Normally, the door frame would be flush with the drywall on the inside, and the frame would overlap it and cover the face of the door frame. And so that's something I wanted to do a little bit different, and it makes a really nice deep door frame, and I really like the look of it. I'm cutting both of these side pieces to length. I plan to install them first, and that way I can get a good measurement across the top in order to cut the top piece to the right length. I want that top piece to go out and extend just a little bit over the sides of these side pieces. And I'm just putting these up and making sure they fit perfectly. In fact, this one I had to do just a little trimming on the bottom with my knife to make it go flat up against the bottom and line up perfectly. Just a little fine tuning there so that everything fits nice and tight. Once that's done, it goes on really fast. Just use the brad nailer to attach it. And now I'm working on the top piece. This one I like to have sticking over about 1/8 of an inch on either side. I think it looks better than trying to get it perfectly flush on either side. It looks better to have just a little bit sticking out over each end. And there's the finished look. Well, next, April helped me get things cleaned up a little bit, and I went ahead and trimmed out the inside of the door frame there. That didn't take very long. It's looking really nice. It's great to have the first door frame in. Next, we're moving on to the door frame that goes from the living room into the guest bedroom. Now, for this door frame, we're going to do something a little bit special. We wanted to leave that piece of wood alongside that poured concrete wall section exposed and have kind of a rustic look. And so I didn't want to do the typical door frame trim that would cover that up. And so in lieu of that, we decided to do a metal trim. We're using the same metal piece that we used on the black accent wall in the guest bedroom. We really liked the way that looked. And so that metal trim works really great. It's an inexpensive metal piece that you can get. It has an L-shaped profile with a 1/2 inch lip that sticks out over, so it still leaves a good part of that wood on the side exposed. And you have a 1/2 inch of visible metal trim, and then the frame of the door will cover up the inside of that metal piece. I'm just using a piece of drywall end cap for this. It's about $4 for an 8-foot section, so it's an inexpensive way to trim this out, and it looks really nice. This stuff is fun to work with. You just need a pair of hand tin snips to cut it, and it's also easy to bend into whatever shape you need to. Here I'm working on the top piece that'll go along the top of the board, and I'm cutting a little notch and a bend to go around that little detail piece of drywall there and make a nice continual flow even as it steps down into that board. With this door being right up against that poured concrete wall and us wanting to leave that stud exposed, we had to get creative in how to do this door frame and the trim, but I think this is going to work out really well. And that finishes up the trim on the outside of this door frame. Next I'll move to the inside and put the metal in the same manner and fashion around the door, so it's trimmed out inside and outside in this metal, and this 1/2 inch of metal is the only trim that you'll see, and I think it's going to look really nice. Like I say, the next piece that I put in will be that wide wood door frame itself, and the only visible trim will be this metal. It's a really interesting look. With that done, I'm ready to install the door frame. I start with the header. This one actually fit really nice. It's always nice when it fits the first go. And I was able to just attach it with a few brad nails, and then the sideboards go in. They lock into that notch up on top and then just slide into place. Attach those with a few screws to make sure it's really firmly attached, and then some brad nails, and it is ready to go. And here you can see the finished result. I love the look of this metal trim. It looks really minimalist and modern. Now moving on to the bathroom door from the main living area. This frame went in really quick. These boards are actually a little thinner than some of the other wood frame doors. It's just the way it worked out with the door that's going to be going in this frame. They just needed to be a little thinner. I didn't have quite as much room in the rough opening as I did on some of the other doors, but it worked out nice. Still looks good. Still the same kind of construction. It's got the notches on the top board that lock the sideboards into place, and I'm just getting those installed now. Those went in really quick, and I was ready to put on the wood trim around this one. Both of the doors going into the bathroom I trimmed out with the wooden trim. And here's just a quick close-up of what the woodwork looks like. This is a picture of the top corner of the door. In our video next week, I'm going to be restoring 3 antique doors. I love doing this so much. Really looking forward to this. I'll be restoring these doors and installing them in these door frames, as well as some other projects. So join us again next Saturday, and don't forget to like and subscribe.